Hi and welcome. This is András speaking here, and this is a follow-up recording to answer the questions that were left unanswered during our AD5 Generalist information webinar. So I have here quite a few questions in front of me, and I did my best to only cover those or only list those that were not answered at the live session, but there might be some overlap, but for the better, because rather have a question answered twice than at no time, hopefully the same way. And I try to keep some consistency because I want to be sure that you get the best information there is, with the usual caveat that I am not the official source of information. It's the European Personal Selection Office, EPSO, and the selection board of a given competition that can always give you the authoritative answer to any question. And of course, the notice of competition. So how does the difficulty of the reasoning test compare to those used in other competitions, such as the AD transport exam? Usually the level of difficulty is based on AST, so assistant versus AD exams, and AD5 or AD6 or AD7. The transport exam, as far as I recall, was an AD7 exam, so the level there was likely higher. And for the AD5, the level would be a little easier. But I say that with a lot of caveat, because given the number of expected candidates, they might set the bar fairly high in terms of level of difficulty. And we'll see in the notice of competition where the pass mark is going to be, whether it's at 50% or 60%, and whether they combine abstract, verbal, numerical. So it's hard to say a definite answer for that. But for AD exams, generally the level is, it moves within a certain range. And definitely harder than for AST exams, and usually harder than contract agent tests. Okay, what's the best way to stay up to date with EU legislative developments? Well, if you're a real nerd, you will be reading the official journal, not notice of competition, but the official journal every day. But I actually know one person who does that on a regular basis. But it's probably a massive overkill if your aim is to prepare for EU competitions or the generalist exam. Well, you may want to subscribe to Euractiv, to Politico, and maybe some other general news outlet, but these two would cover EU news, and based on that, you will have a pretty good understanding of the political and legislative developments, and also whatever you learn about the institutions, procedures, policies. It's a great way to see that in practice of how it translates into real-life events. Number 3, when exactly should we expect the EPSO AD5 competition to take place if the notice is released in July? So with that assumption or hope that it's released in July, meaning the notice of competition is published in July, there will be an application deadline, which is usually about a month. And then usually more time is given for you to send in your degree or underlying diploma, or if they might request something else, then they put that deadline a little further out so it doesn't overlap with the deadline to apply for the exam. And then the exam itself, based on this assumption, would likely be around October, early October, late October, we don't know. But there are lots of caveats in this system that we discussed in that webinar, whether EPSO as an organization, as an inter-service organization, they are going to be able to conclude the public procurement that is going to decide which test provider is going to be administering these tests, the remotely administered tests. So that's also a big variable in that equation. Next one, could you recap what to do if we don't hear anything after applying? I'm not sure what this refers to, possibly to you applying to a specific job, because for the EPSO competition, once you're enrolled and the formal criteria are fulfilled, that you have EU citizenship, you fulfilled military services, that's compulsory based on the country of first citizenship, and you meet the character requirements, which is a fairly broad term, but that is usually not the hurdle that candidates would fail at. So with those, you are in the pipeline, so to say. You're going to be invited to the test. You're going to sit the test. You're going to go through the entire process. And if you succeed, you're placed on the reserve list. The more open-ended process starts then is actually finding a job. And then you apply for specific vacancies that you hear about or that you are communicated or you're given in your EPSO profile. Next one. When will the 2025 edition of the EU Test Administrator book be released? Will it include new questions? So the book is released at the time of the recording is 22nd May, tomorrow. So depending on when we release this and when you hear this, it will have been released by then. So you can find it in bookshops, in a few bookshops in Brussels, and online, definitely on Amazon, on the publisher's own website, on John Harper Publishing, and a couple other places. So that is released. Whether it's going to include new questions, some, but the abstract verbal numerical reasoning questions have not been replaced. So they've been corrected. There were some inaccuracies there that we have clarified, and a couple new questions for EU knowledge and some other bits and pieces with kind of a more dedicated and more streamlined content to help your preparation, including not questions, but references and ideas on how to prepare for the digital skills exam, which at the time of recording seems fairly likely to be part of the AD5 Generalist competition. All right, let me just press here a button, make sure that I'm not disturbed. So how will EU Training's EU Knowledge questions for AD5 differ from those internal competitions? So our own as EU Training question database, I hope it's a bit more realistic in the sense that the internal competitions got a lot of criticism and a lot of pressure and pushback for the sometimes pretty crazy questions that the candidates were asked. So I'm hoping that at the AD5 Generalist one, those criticisms will have been fed back to EPSO and they will be more reasonable. By the way, the internal competitions are practically not run by EPSO. Those are run by if it's a commission, that is the commission's HR department, and they could get operational support from EPSO or other, but formally, legally speaking, it's not EPSO. But in any case, our questions are very broad in the sense that they cover a lot of ground, procedural history, tons of policy areas, and we deliberately included some really crazy questions as well. Again, just to be sure that you'd rather know more than less, that the breadth of your preparation is wider, and rather be positively surprised than say, oh, I wish I had prepared about that. So I'm hoping that our question database is very comprehensive, and it's about 1,500 questions at this point. So it's very, very detailed. What is the recommended reading list to prepare for the EU knowledge test? Well, recommended reading list, we've put out a couple of links some time ago, which you can hopefully easily find on our website. If not, just send a message to our support team. Then there is the book, the Ultimate EU Handbook, which is not the test book, it's the handbook, which we released a couple months ago, and that covers institutions, history, and procedures. It does not cover not cover policy areas, because those are in the briefing. So we created 18 briefings that you can find on the EU Training website. Again, we're not claiming that those briefings are so deep as to cover everything about a particular policy area, but it shows you a very solid understanding of the building blocks of those policy areas. Based on that, you can dig a little deeper if you consider one policy to be more likely, more important to feature or be featured at the exam. And that is a very hard thing to predict. But again, based on the political realities and priorities and other things, some policy areas tend to be more underlined than others. So the reading list, as I said, on the website, then there's the EU handbook, then there's the EU course. So if you prefer an e-learning format to watch it and learn and see the graphs and every piece of explanation we've put out there, you find the EU course on the EU Training website. And you also have Spotify, so you can listen to the audio. All the 14 hours of audio, you can get access to that for a small monthly fee. And besides that, I look at it more as a skeleton and then kind of putting the flesh on it, and then you can go further and further. So make sure that you know those building blocks that constitute EU knowledge, which obviously is vast, and have those building blocks and then add more depth to it, add more nuance to it as you go along, but not necessarily go extremely deep in competition policy or trade or fisheries, and then completely forget about certain procedures or institutional dynamics. Will there be training or webinars about the AD7 Building Specialist competition? We're definitely going to do an information webinar that we always do for every single new competition. And then we will see what the requirements are, because the domain-specific knowledge, almost certainly we're not going to be covering it in a webinar format. We might have multiple choice questions written by experts for those, but there is a bit of uncertainty there as to when that competition is going to be, probably towards the second half or towards the end of the year. And it now has 4 subdomains as opposed to 1 big domain, which was the case a couple months ago based on the planning. So once that is fully confirmed that those 4 will be the subdomains, then we can also talk to our experts and create those multiple choice questions, which will be available on the EU Training website. Do you have an estimate for the number of applications expected this year? Rumors are saying anything between 30 to 40,000. These are guesses. These are estimates because there has not been an AD5 Generalist competition for almost 6 years by now. So numbers are likely going to be very high, and then we'll see. It's really hard to predict beyond that. How many eligible candidates are anticipated? We've heard numbers between 1,000 and 1,300. Eligible as in on the reserve list. So those who pass the competition and are placed on the reserve list, the number is expected to be around 1,000, 1,300. How many candidates? I answered that in the previous question. How much time is expected between the publication of the notice and the test date? Well, usually it could be 2 months, but consider that there's August, and August, nothing is going to really happen. So if, according to the plan, it's published around July, then there's going to be quite a pause because of summer, and then obviously the planning will be happening, and they will have planned it by the time they publish it. So the exam could be mid-September, late September, early October, like I said before. I think October is a more likely guess. What is their estimated exam date considering high number of applicants? So that is already answered. Does the passing the AD5 competition guarantee a job offer, or there are additional steps? That's an important question because it doesn't guarantee a job. And that is sometimes a bit disappointing or frustrating idea, but it's important to be transparent about it and know that in advance. What happens is that you are on the reserve list. It doesn't guarantee you a job, but it's a prerequisite. It's a precondition for you to get a permanent job to be on the reserve list. Once you are there, you are eligible for an interview. You are eligible to be hired if there's a vacancy that meets the necessary conditions of meaning that you are on a particular reserve list. In that case, the additional step is you need to be invited to a vacancy, typically by a head of unit, by any of the institutions, because this is almost certainly going to be a reserve list where any of the EU institutions can pick candidates from. And if that works out well, the interview, the conversation, then you are hired. So that's pretty much it. There's a medical test and all the kind of those things. I just tell you that funny story that a friend of mine who was about to be hired several years ago, he failed a medical test because he had a kind of dinner that did not improve his cholesterol level, and then they said, okay, come back again just to be sure that it's okay. But again, there's no issue there. It's really no issue there, and the formal criterion is about passing the competition, being on the reserve list, and then finding a vacancy. And truth be told, some candidates will not get a job in the end. And that might be because of their own choice, because their life circumstances may have changed, or any other factors that can play a role. And certainly a lot depends on how many vacancies there are at the different EU institutions. But it can be a few months, perhaps even a year, before a proper kind of match happens between your profile and a vacancy where you would be eligible. Next one, what's the difference between the content of your website and the printed book? Well, there is no overlap. So we made sure that all the questions in the EU test book are not duplicated on the website and vice versa. Obviously, it's the same topic. So you could see certain methodology or other tips which are similar to the ones we give in our webinars and ebooks or other places. But many candidates like the format of a book where you can underline it, when you can take it with you to the park or what have you. It's a different way of learning. And the book is very helpful to learn methodology and practice. And the website typically is very helpful to simulate your preparation for the exam. And these are somewhat separate study methods and cognitive processes. Is there a minimum number of years of professional experience required to apply? We're talking the AD5 Generalist, so no, there is no work experience required. And we are curious to see in the notice of competition whether they're going to see, say, a bachelor degree, so a 3-year university degree recognized by a European public authority, that will be the minimum without work experience. Most likely that's going to be the scenario, but possibly they might say you may need one more year of studies, so basically a master's degree. And if you don't have that, there might be maybe a 1 year experience. So again, that nuance is pretty important, but as long as you have either a master's degree or at least a year of work experience, you're going to be set. The question is, if you're a recent graduate or you're about to graduate in July, will you be with a bachelor's degree, will you be eligible or not? Can a generalist be hired at 85 level, evolve to higher grades like 86 or 7? Absolutely. That's the whole idea in the public service in the European Union, that based on your job performance and feedback and all the rest. But definitely you can and probably should, and you probably will progress to 86 and 87 and all the rest, perhaps to AD16, which is the Director General level. Is it possible to join the excuse me, is it possible to join the EEAS, so the European External Action Service, through this AD5 competition? To some degree, yes, but it's a little complicated how they hire or who they hire, because it's mostly seconded diplomats from member state public administrations and sometimes seconded officials from other institutions. So you could be working formally for the European Commission, but be placed in the European External Action Service as a seconded official, and that could also be in an EU representation or rather EU delegation. So technically yes, but it's a little complicated. What happens if someone has a dual citizenship, including a non-EU nationality, like Russian? Let's say on the face of it, it's not a problem, because you need to have an EU citizenship. Whether you are a citizen, very specifically of Russia, let's say politically, it can be sensitive in some positions or in some places. I'm guessing, and perhaps it's an educated guess. But again, in formal terms, having dual citizenship is not an issue. What are the character requirements mentioned for eligibility? Well, this is a little blurry, this point of what it actually means, but it could mean that if you have maybe a criminal record, or you may be applying for a sensitive position politically, or let's say trade-wise, or some other secret or highly confidential issues are being handled there, it might require a security clearance. And security clearance is typically done by the member state authorities of your citizenship. And then they subject you to that. So that's where it could be an issue. But beyond that, I think it largely depends on the details of your situation. Is any part of the AD5 selection procedure conducted in person? The answer is no. Only once you're on the reserve list, only then is typically an interview before you're hired into a job. That could be online, that could be in person, but the selection process as it stands today, and is it likely not going to change, there's no spoken part. So basically you can pass only with your fingers. Can someone who will obtain their degree in August apply for the exam if it's held in September or October? I would say most likely yes, because the diploma, the degree, needs to be handed in a little later than the application deadline, like I said earlier. So if you actually you get your degree in August, chances are you'll be able to apply, because it will be pushed back a little bit to be sure that you can send it in on time. But again, we need to see the notice of competition. What is the difference between the CAST selection procedure and this generalist competition? Well, the big difference for CAST is for contract agent, it's for fixed term contracts, and it's an abstract verbal numerical reasoning test and nothing else. There could be an interview, or there could be occasionally some ad hoc kind of test, depending on which position they want to hire you for. But again, it's a much more limited and slightly different procedure, whereas this one leads to permanent jobs. So you get the status of an European Union civil servant, and that is open-ended, and you can stay in that job for the rest of your life. Will the eligibility criteria deadline be before or after the exams? See in the recent AD7 research and translator competitions. Well, normally it should be in the notice of competition. So that is listed there. When that is checked, typically it is checked only for those who passed one or more hurdles, so to say, in the competition, not before. So everybody will be invited to sit the test, and then those who pass their qualifications or eligibility criteria will be checked. We'll see whether that might change, but I don't expect major changes. What can we expect in the written test? In the written test is going to be an EU free text essay. So that is practically a written test. We need to see whether a background document is going to be shared with you. And even so, we're expecting something pretty broad and pretty generic. It could be on the European Union, the Draghi report. Well, not the whole 438 or I don't know how many pages there are in it. So not the full thing, but something which is kind of broad enough to be the basis of an assignment. And the assignment is, as the name suggests, something, it's an essay, a written piece that you need to write on an EU-related topic based on that background material, or perhaps not. This is a variable we are observing and listening to our different friends to say, okay, which one is going to be prevailing in the notice of competition. But the written piece itself, it's only going to measure communication competence. It's not going to measure subject matter knowledge. And again, I say that with the caveat, we need to see when the notice of competition is out. But as things stand right now, it's a written communication exercise first and foremost. Will EPSO use TestWe as the online testing tool again? Almost certainly no. They are looking for a new provider, and most likely that's going to happen before, and that's kind of a precondition for the exam to happen, and that will be not TestWe by all likelihood. Does the quality of your work experience influence the chances of being hired? Well, I wouldn't say the quality of your work experience, the relevance of your work experience. If you have a certain background, you dealt with health issues, for instance, and DG Sante, which deals with health issues, looks at your profile and you meet the other conditions and you will have passed the competition, you're in the reserve list, well, you are certainly an interesting candidate for them over someone who perhaps has no such background. Is a PhD considered or work experience? The definition of work experience is it needs to have been obtained after the minimum diploma requirement for a given competition. So for here, most likely yes, and it needs to be paid. So if you were teaching at the same time or you had similar assignments, then almost certainly it is considered work experience. If not, I'd say whoever looks at that, but needs to look at the details and decide whether it qualifies as such. This is relevant in the AD5 Generalist one. It's relevant for the salary step. So there is a grade, that's AD5, that is known, but you could be placed in a slightly higher salary step based on the number of years of work experience you have. Will we be able to choose the time slot for the written test, or everyone takes it at the same time? As we know it now, everybody takes it at the same time, but given the number of candidates that they're expecting, some slightly different system might be put in place, whether it's a option between 1 to 3 days or similar. They might accommodate that kind of flexibility. But normally, for most exams that have been taking place in the past 2 years, a written exam was at the same time, same day for everyone. Is the AD5 SAU free text essay pass-fail or scored? I believe it's going to be scored. Not just passing a certain minimum mark, but it's going to be scored and it's going to count towards your overall score, as far as we know now. But again, we shall see. Will EPSO publish guidelines or study materials for the EU knowledge test? I'm expecting that they will publish something. So they will publish a couple of links or documents or similar, or pointing the candidates to those resources, which will almost certainly be EU resources and not textbooks or any other, but something that is available in 24 languages. And then we'll see how helpful those are, or they could be very broad. If they say, check the europa.eu website, well, you're probably not much closer to narrowing the scope of what you need to know. Can we complete both the application and exam in English, even if it's not our native language? You can. The application can be completed in any of the 24 official languages. And the exam, also, there's a language 1 and language 2, typically, and both can be any of the EU's 24 official languages as long as they are not the same. So it could be Czech and Slovak, and it could be Maltese and Portuguese, and it could be Latvian and English. So it's really up to you. And again, it's not linked to your passport. So me as a Hungarian, Belgian, I could choose English. no problem because it's not linked to which countries or passport am I holding. Who will grade the EU free text essay? Well, almost certainly EU officials who volunteer, and there is a certain selection, there's a certain internal system where they pick those evaluators, and they will read it anonymously, of course, and give scores. Will everyone take the essay test, or only those who pass the CBT and EU knowledge? Everyone takes all the tests. There's no scoring while you are taking the test. Only afterwards do they look at whether you passed or didn't pass or what score you have and decide on whose essay they're going to check based on previously established transparent criteria. Can someone who passes the CAST function group 4 reasoning test skip the AD5 reasoning test? Many people would wish so, but that's not the case. It's not a kind of passport that you can carry with you. It's really, you need to take each exam and each test separately. So there's no carrying over of those results. Are the AD5 reasoning tests harder than those in the CAST competitions? Yes, see my earlier answer. Those typically tend to be harder. Why does it say that the reasoning tests do not count for final result? Because indeed, they are just a pass-fail gateway. That is the case because you need to pass it, but we need to see the scores. So we need to see whether it's 50%, 60%, perhaps different, and whether the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning, you need to pass each one on their own merit, or maybe they group together the numerical and the abstract, and the joint score of these, that's where you need to reach a certain minimal pass mark, which would definitely be easier for many people because numerical and abstract tends to be the most challenging or difficult for many candidates. Can candidates take the exam from outside the EU? Well, practically you can take it from outside the EU if you happen to find yourself in Japan, as long as the timing works out. You can take it from anywhere with an internet connection and the computer where you can install the right software, which typically requires administrator rights. But you need to have an EU citizenship, so you need to meet all the formal criteria. So if you happen to have only a Japanese passport, then you will not be eligible for the exam. Is EPSO planning a webinar or information about the AST competition, so the assistant competition? I'm not aware of such a thing, but they often do information sessions or webinars, and you can follow them on LinkedIn and Facebook and different platforms, and you could get access to it. We as EU Training, as a private company, we always do an information session when a new competition is launched, and that is always free. Can candidates go back and forth between questions during the test? Inside a particular test, say numerical reasoning, you can go back and forth, but you cannot jump over to the EU knowledge test and go back to the numerical in any way. So one block, one kind of test, it needs to be completed. You hand it in, only then you proceed to the next one. Will all tests be multiple choice? Yes. So as far as we know at this point, except for the EU knowledge test, that is also not multiple choice, but I meant the EU free text essay. So that's an essay where you need to write, but again, still on the computer, still on the screen, but it's not a multiple choice. Okay, are questions in EU Training AD5 preparation package still relevant for 2025? I absolutely believe so. And we have a handy system where anyone who sees a question that seems outdated or irrelevant, we immediately check it. We correct it if necessary, so our database is fresh and helpful. What kind of jobs are covered under AD5 Generalist profile? Can you give examples? Well, basically anything. It's really the broadest kind of entry point because you could be dealing with trade negotiations with Singapore. Now, I don't remember whether that's already been concluded or in progress, but just for the sake of example. And you could be dealing with internal matters, HR perhaps, but you could also be dealing with relations with the European Parliament while working at DG Grow. So basically anything that European officials do, the AD5 opens the possibility to those. Obviously, certain tasks and certain positions require additional knowledge or additional qualifications. So someone with a biology degree might be more directed towards areas where that sort of knowledge is known, whether it's pesticide regulation or something related to cloning, what have you. But again, from the perspective of the European Union and especially policy perspective. Would algebra be included in numerical reasoning test? Well, numerical reasoning tests always work based on a chart or table and calculations. So in that sense, yes. Usually the four kind of basic operations or maybe fractions, those are what you need, and percentage calculations and a couple other somewhat basic operations, but there is intense time pressure. So you need to find, kind of wake up that muscle if that's been dormant for some time because you haven't dealt with mathematics for a while. But as long as you practice and you're really in the mindset of solving those problems quickly, then it should be all good. By the way, we have a math refresher webinar on our website exactly for those who may not have dealt with mathematics for a while, but they want to be sure that they are up to the job when it comes to numerical reasoning. Does the choice of application language influence the language used for testing? No. Where the application language is on the interface of EPSO's website and your EPSO profile, but the language used for testing is a specific choice you need to pick, language 1 and language 2, for that specific competition. And you may sit another competition at any point in time with different language combination. Are all EPSO tests taken in the same language? No. Language 1, language 2, like I said earlier. Is the EU Knowledge test confirmed to be included this year? That is almost a certainty. So it's almost certain that there will be an EU Knowledge multiple choice quiz, most likely with 30 or 40 questions, or 30 questions in 40 minutes. Those are the numbers we've been hearing. And that is a multiple choice question, as discussed before. Will all tests, CBT, EU Knowledge essay, take place on the same day or spread, excuse me, will all tests, CBT, EU Knowledge essay, take place on the same day or be spread over time? Chances are on the same day in a sequence with some pauses and breaks in between. But I also heard some rumors that they might spread it over some days, not the tests, but a candidate might need to pick one specific date and then sit through the tests, but there might be multiple days. Or they do more of a kind of a vertical cut in the sense that everybody sits the same test on one day, and then everybody sits another test on another day. We'll see, because it's a little extraordinary or out of the ordinary given the number of candidates they are expecting. So that requires certain accommodations of the organization. Will the material sources to study for EU Knowledge test be announced? I think that's been answered to the degree we know at this point. What measures are taken to prevent use of AI tools during the exam? Well, during the exam, that's a tricky question. You're not supposed to use any external tool or service or any kind of help, whether it's audible, whether it's visual, whether it's software powered or any other. So depending on the provider of what safety mechanisms they put in place, there might need to be a camera, maybe a pre-check, or maybe during the exam there needs to be a live camera feed, and it's actually AI being used on the other end where they analyze that they want to be sure that you're not using any help that you're not supposed to use. But that's the rule, and I honestly would not risk anything like that. Be sure that you're 100% compliant with the rules. Can the essay, EU free text essay, be taken in English, even if your language 1 is different? Most likely it's going to be a language 2. So if language 1 is French or language 1 is Polish, you can absolutely choose language 2 as English, which is most likely going to be the language of the EU free text essay. Once on the reserves, can someone apply for jobs above AD5? No, you need to sort of earn it, either through time and promotion, or there could be internal or external competition that you pass on that grade, and that is going to make you eligible to be hired into that level of position. Where can we find examples of text types required in written tests, briefing notes, reports? We have some material on that, I believe, on the website. We probably need to check where that is, but at one point we wrote a couple of pointers on that. It might be part of our written test webinar. It's probably something we're going to need to look into it, but we did some kind of guidance of what a briefing note is, what's a report. But the free text essay is most likely not going to require you any format, because candidates are not or cannot be expected to know what a formal briefing note looks like. It's more about how good is your written communication, how well can you express yourself, and all the other criteria. Will EU Knowledge test include open questions or be multiple choice? It's going to be multiple choice, so it's not going to be like an essay type or any sort where they say, how do you see the future of the EU's relationship with the United States? I mean, that would be a politically charged question, but it's an open-ended question. Or to say even, what measures has the EU taken to ensure human rights? Well, again, it's an open question, but it's going to be multiple choice. Are all EPSO competitions AD5 and AST likely to follow the same language policy, language 1, language 2? Almost certainly, yes. I say almost certainly, but the emphasis could be also on certainly. So very likely that's going to stay the language regime. What is the expected time between the launch of the competition and the exams? I think that's been answered. Will the Ultimate EU handbook be updated for 2025 and be a discount for buyers of the previous edition? Well, we're doing some relatively small, I wouldn't even say changes. We have not been told about any factual or other error in the book, which makes me happy, and I hope it stays that way. But if there is such error spotted, we would certainly put it on the book's website. And in terms of what the update is going to be, we're going to do some kind of, not index, but pointers of where you find certain topics, not just on a single page where it appears, but point you to other pages where the same topic is discussed. But again, it's just more of an ease of use issue and not additional content or not correcting anything that's been pointed out. Are digital editions of your books available? Yes. So on John Harper Publishing website, you can find the ebook version for purchase. Does the EU written test count toward the final score or ranking? Most likely, yes. So the EU free text essay is going to be part of the final score. Are you planning to add other test languages to the EU knowledge section? The EU knowledge, we're thinking about it, but for now, I believe it's in English. But we might consider doing translations of the existing database into other languages. If there's such a need, please let us know so we know what you might need. What is the difference between the Ultimate EU handbook and policy briefs in terms of EU knowledge? Well, the handbook, as I said, it's EU history, procedures, and institutions, and the briefings focus on policies. So from my previous example of fisheries, but I could say many others, from agriculture, from digital, from environment, and so on. How can one increase their chances of getting hired once on the reserve list? Well, we have a webinar exactly on that, and we're doing a new edition of that webinar probably in September. So how to get a job once you're on the reserve list. So if you are concerned about that question or affected by that issue, please be sure, sign up, look out for that, and we're going to have a brand new version or at least an updated version of that classic. What role does nationality play in selection or hiring? That's a very complicated question because the EU staff regulation says there needs to be a proportionate representation of the citizens of Europe. And that is a tricky question. What does that mean? So you simply count the number of citizens from country X proportionate to their number, or let's say their population in the EU. Or do you actually put extra weight to more senior positions or AD positions versus AST versus secretary? So there are many variables there. And just one thing, Belgians tend to be overrepresented in the institutions for one reason or another. But again, depending on which level, which directorate general, which institution we're talking about. So there are a lot of variables there. So it does play a role, but that's a discussion that probably would take more time. Is the Scratchpad for the online test usable and comparable to EU Training's interface? We believe so. Have been doing and will be doing some minor adjustments, but by and large, you can expect a very similar interface. Will abstract and numerical scores be averaged? Well, we need to see. Like I said before, they might be combined and the pass mark is established based on the combined score, or they are taken separately. We will know that from the notice of competition. Can a candidate apply in one language take the test in another? That's been answered. Why is verbal reasoning not kept for the second part if it's more language intensive? Not sure what you mean by the second part, but yes, it's language intensive, but the language is also looked at through these tests and also in the EU free text essay and the EU knowledge one. So yeah, that if I understood the question correctly. Is the exam simulation provided by EPSO up to date? Well, that I don't know. I'm guessing they would pay attention to keeping it up to date, but there's been some personal changes at EPSO and that may have delayed or put to the side that sort of updating. So I would guess so, but don't take it for granted. And final question, will EU Training update its policy brief materials if new issue becomes relevant? Yes, that's a good question. We're going to take a look at that probably before the exam, just to be sure it's as up-to-date as humanly possible. And you see anyways from the dates and others that it's when the cutoff date was, and I think we even mentioned that. It was about maybe March-ish of 2025. But that's a good point where we'll take a look just to be sure that we are fully up-to-date with the recent events and developments. With that, I thank you for your attention. Really appreciate that. Appreciate those who participated in the webinar and those who took the time to watch this rapid fire question and answer. So we covered 70 questions. Oof, that's a lot. And I hope that this answered all your main questions. If you have more, reach out to us, send a message through the website, through the support team. We'll be very happy to point you to the right resource or answer the question directly. Thank you for watching this, and thank you for using EU Training. Really appreciate that. To be continued when the big day arrives, meaning the AD5 Generalist competition of 2025 is officially launched.